Hi, my name is Jake Hoyt, and I'm a senior at Watkinson School in West Hartford, Connecticut, and this is my senior project. Over the summer, I began to develop an interest in aviation and how to fly planes, and thought it would be a great idea for a senior project. So I scheduled an intro flight, and I loved it. I began to take lessons at Brainerd Airport in Hartford, Connecticut, and decided to also do my internship there. Let me hand you over to my mentor now so he can give you a quick introduction.
Hi, I'm John Cook. I'm Jake's CFI, his flight instructor over here at Hartford Brainerd Airport, and we're learning to fly with Learn to Fly Connecticut.
Thanks for that, John. Now, this video will document my time during my internship and discuss some of the things I've done, as well as showcasing what I've learned. Now, without further ado, I will send you over to the entrance of the airport, where I'll talk to you again, but over there. So, let's go. All right, so here we are at the Hartford Jet Center, Brainerd Airport, where I'm doing my internship. So let's head on in. Now that we are in the lobby, we're going to sign in and then head over to the plane so that we can do our pre-flight procedures. All right, so this is the pre-flight. It's what we do before we take the plane up into the air, just to make sure that everything's in tip-top shape and everything is working so that we can fly the plane to our best of our abilities and we can secure our own safety. So to begin the pre-flight, we are first going to enter the cockpit, and we're going to turn on the master switch, the landing light, the anti-collision or beacon lights, and the navigation lights. We do this so that we can circle the aircraft and check to make sure the lights are working, and then turn them off so that it does not drain the battery. Now, when we go around to the right wingtip, we'll see a green navigation light and the white strobe lights. The navigation lights on a plane are used to increase the airplane's visibility, as well as air traffic controllers on the ground, and help you navigate to your destination safely and help minimize the risk of collision. Now, moving over to the landing light, we are going to just check and make sure that that's on, working, and that there are no cracks. And then as we move over to the left wingtip, we will see the strobe light once again, except this time it will be a red navigation light, but it serves the same purpose. It's just symbolizing that that is the left side of the plane. Now, moving over to the tail end of the plane, we will see a red flashing beacon light and another navigation light, which is the amber light on the far tail end of the rudder. The beacon light is the flashing light that is fixed on the top of the aircraft, and its purpose is to alert the ground crew and other aircraft that it is starting up, it's running, it's shutting down, it's about to start moving, or it is flying. And this amber light is another navigation light. So now that the checking of the lights is done, we can move on to the other parts of the pre-flight. Before we complete the rest of the pre-flight, we are going to want to make sure that the flaps are down and have a little bit of a wiggle but are still in a locked position, unlike the ailerons, which should have free range of motion, but we'll get into that later. Here we can indeed see that the flaps are locked. And we also want to check the push rod here and make sure that it just has a little bit of a wiggle but is not moving a ton, just to make sure it's stable and in place. Then what we want to do is check along the flaps and the rest of the wing and make sure that none of the screws are missing or broken and they are still intact. And the next thing we're going to want to do is check the ailerons and make sure that they have full range of motion and can go down and back up, and then check the push rod underneath and make sure that has a little bit of a wiggle like the other one. Here we are just going along the edges of the wings, making sure that there are no dents, bumps, or scrapes, and everything is a smooth surface and is fully intact. Here we are going to want to check the tire and the brakes and the suspension and make sure that that is all set. Then we are going to want to get a sample of the fuel and check the coloring and see if there are any debris in it and just make sure that it looks okay. Here we can see that the 100 low lead fuel that we use in the plane is indeed a bright shade of blue with no debris in it. We also want to check and make sure that there's no water in the fuel, and we do this by checking the surface of the fuel and making sure that there's no separation of water on the top layer, because the density of the fuel and water is different, so the water would be resting on top of the fuel. Once all those boxes are checked, we can pour the fuel back in and move on. Next, we will open up the cowling and check the engine. We want to make sure that everything's intact, all the wires, nothing is broken or twisted or stripped apart. And then we want to check the oil. In this plane, we want it to be between 4 to 6 quarts. 6 is fine. And as you can see here, we are between 4 and 6. We're right about 5, so that's perfect. We're going to put that back in and then move on. Now we can check the propeller. We can run our hands down the edges of it, make sure there are no dents, bumps, scrapes, or major cracks, and check the nose of the plane and put our hands in the vents, make sure that there are no birds' nests, nothing nesting inside, still no major breaks or cracks. That's something we don't want in any part of the plane. Next, we want to open the cowling on the other side of the nose of the plane and check the magnetos. The magnetos provide ignition to the engine via spark plugs. We want to look in there, make sure that everything is set, and once again that there are no cracks, breaks, nothing's broken apart, there are no wires strewn everywhere. Next, we want to grab the fuel from this part of the plane. It sumps the fuel from the lowest point in the engine, and the little copper colored thing where the fuel comes out of is called the gascolator. Now we will get the fuel from the left wing. It's pretty much the same process as the other half of the plane, and then once we finish up with this wing, we will then move on to the tail end of the aircraft. Next, we will check the stall horn and indicator, which warns us if we will stall the plane, meaning a sudden loss of the plane's lift and results in a loss of altitude. This happens when the wings exceed a certain angle from the wind and airstream, which can be known as the angle of attack. Then we will check the pitot tube, which gives us our altitude, our airspeed, etc. And now the rest of the pre-flight is pretty much the same until we go to the empennage, otherwise known as the tail end of the plane. Now we will check the antennas. These are the antennas for comms 1 and 2. I don't know which one because we can't see the routing of the wires to the radios that are inside the plane, but we want to make sure that they're not broken and that they are in perfect shape. And here we can zoom in on our ID plate. This is pretty much like our license plate on a car. It gives our standard identification information. Now we can check our stabilator. We want to make sure that it goes all the way up and all the way down, has free range of motion like the flaps and the ailerons. And we wanted to make sure that the trim tab in the center also moves up and down along with it. We also now want to check the rudder, just make sure that it has a little bit of a wiggle but does not fully move left and fully move right, because that would mean that it is broken and we don't want that. And here's our ELT, or otherwise known as an emergency locator transmitter. It's pretty much designed to transmit a distress signal on certain frequencies, mainly 1 to 1.5, in case of an accident, and it tells our identification number, our location, etc., just to make sure that we're safe and so people can find us and get to us. And that does it for the pre-flight. All right, so now that the pre-flight outside's done, we're going to check and start the plane on the inside. Okay, so for this part, I decided not to list every single thing that I do inside the plane to start it, and I'll focus more on showing me getting onto the runway and the actual flying part and the maneuvers that I've done, rather than just more of the procedural aspect of things. I also couldn't get the cockpit and headset audio to work, so just please bear with me on that regard. Alright, so we're about to go onto the runway to do our takeoff. We're going to want to take off at about 45 to 55 knots, which is close to 55 or 60 miles an hour, depending on if we're at the lower end or the higher end of the spectrum for 45 to 55. And then once we get up into the air, we'll want to climb out at about 79 knots, pretty exact, because that's going to be our best rate of climb. And yes, I do fly the plane, it's just not at this moment because I'm the one doing the recording and my instructor is the one taking over the plane. And at this point in time, I was just had my phone set up on the dash area and was just flying and having it videotape what was outside right in front of me. So these are S-turns, one of the maneuvers that I've been learning. I'll put up a diagram so that it's easier for you to understand what I'm doing. You find a long straight road pretty much, and you do semicircle turns around it, trying to level the plane off evenly when you cross back over, and then you repeat doing each time accordingly, and you have to take the wind into account because sometimes it'll either push you further away from the road or further in, and you have to turn accordingly. So this next maneuver is turns around a point, a maneuver where you pick a point and you try to do a perfect circle around it, having to take the wind into account because depending on where you are, it will either push you closer or further away from that point, and you have to turn so that you can account for that. It's a lot harder than it looks, and I did my turns around a point around this. So here I'm just finishing up my full turn around a point, and these were just a few of the maneuvers that I did when I was up in the air. I also practiced ones such as emergency procedures and steep turns, which are turns at a 45-degree bank, or otherwise known as angle. They're very steep. But for now, just enjoy these beautiful shots I managed to get one day when I flew above the clouds. So here they are. That's some awesome scenery right there. Now I'll talk about the landings. We want to land at about 70 knots and put the big runway number right in the middle of our windshield and have our flaps fully down to slow our landing. When we get close to the numbers, we want to flare or pull back on the yoke and slowly lower the plane to the ground. I've been practicing landings a lot recently during my lessons and usually do about 10 landings and takeoffs. That's called a traffic pattern, where we just circle around the airport in like a rectangular formation and then just come back and do landings and takeoffs repeatedly. So what you just saw in the video was what I did throughout my internship and the Saturdays that I've spent at the airport. We practiced maneuvers such as landings, takeoffs, stalls, turns around a point, and S-turns. And on the days when we couldn't fly due to weather conditions, we went up in the classroom and we did ground school and learned more on the technical side of things. Thank you for watching my senior seminar project video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to go on another flight. Planes!